Before moving to Parkwood Crest, a suburban neighborhood in the outskirts of a Midwestern city, I imagined a peaceful life in a place that boasted manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and a friendly sense of community. Most of the residents here were working professionals or retirees who enjoyed weekend cookouts and the occasional neighborhood watch chat. The houses weren't massive mansions, but each had its own driveway and a tidy garage, part of the agreement under the local homeowners association, HOA. The HOA typically oversaw common landscaping, street maintenance, and other shared amenities, funded by our monthly dues. My first few months in Parkwood Crest were fairly uneventful. Mornings of jogging around the block, evenings spent tinkering on my motorcycle in the attached garage. I liked that each home came with a small fenced yard and a separate garage building in the back, accessible via an alley. The garage structures were uniform, each with electricity supplied through the HOA's shared circuit, making them convenient for automatic doors and overhead lights. The peace, however, was short-lived once I fell under the notice of a certain HOA official, Barbara Farnett, known unflatteringly as Karen. In her mid-50s, sporting a short, meticulously styled haircut, she exuded a constantly stern expression and dressed in pastel suits that made her look like she was campaigning for mayor. Karen wielded her authority with the zeal of a self-appointed sheriff. Even though the HOA board had multiple members, Karen was the one who oversaw fiscal compliance, which effectively gave her power over how money was collected and spent. Residents soon learned that she had a habit of imposing her personal frugality on everyone else, sometimes in ways that made little sense. At first, I only saw Karen in passing. She once stopped me while I was putting new license plates on my motorcycle, warning me about oil drips on the driveway. Another time, she complained about my recycling bin being out an hour past the official pickup window. Minor annoyances, but nothing so severe I couldn't shrug off. I'd heard rumors from other neighbors that she was the driving force behind odd cutbacks, like limiting the hours the community clubhouse could be lit or demanding that the landscaping company mow only every other week, leaving browning patches of grass. She frequently cited budget reasons, though we paid a healthy sum in HOA dues. Where did the money go, if not for basic upkeep? I didn't yet realize that her frugality would soon target my own property's garage and forcibly sever the power that I, and presumably other neighbors, depended on for our automatic doors. But that was precisely the drama about to unfold, prompting me to respond in the unlikeliest way, by installing my own solar panel system so that I could remain independent of her meddling. This saga, which started as a petty HOA spat, ended up transforming how I viewed self-reliance, and ironically leaving Karen with no power, pun intended, to stop me. One evening, after a long day at work, I drove my car toward my separate backyard garage and clicked the remote for the automatic garage door. Usually, the door rumbled upward smoothly. This time, nothing. The door remained shut, no sign of movement or even the faint hum of the motor. I frowned, trying again. Still no response. I parked, stepped out, and used my manual key to open the side door. Inside, the overhead light switch did nothing. The entire garage was pitch dark. My first thought was maybe a tripped circuit breaker, but I quickly realized that each row of garages had a shared electrical subpanel managed by the HOA. If my garage alone was out, it wasn't a typical home breaker issue. Possibly it was a wiring fault in that entire row. The next morning, I contacted the HOA's maintenance line, expecting a routine fix. The call center staff politely informed me that they'd look into it. But after a few days passed with no change, I grew frustrated. Opening and closing the garage by hand was annoying, but not the end of the world. Still, the overhead lights, the small workbench lamp, and any outlets in the garage were dead. I stored some tools and my motorcycle gear there, and rummaging around by flashlight felt ridiculous. Eventually, I caught up with my neighbor, Sal, who used the garage next to mine. "Hey," I asked him in the alley, "is your power out too?" He nodded grimly. "Yeah, for about a week now." I called the HOA, and they told me it was a cost-cutting measure, something about saving on electricity. I couldn't believe it. We pay dues for that power. If they want to reduce usage, they can talk to us first, but they just cut it off. Now my door won't open automatically either. They said they're reviewing options to restore it selectively. Sal's tone dripped with sarcasm. I was stunned. The HOA cost-cutting measure apparently meant shutting down an entire circuit that powered about 10 garages in our row. My mind flashed to Karen and her obsession with budget reasons. Could she be behind this? Probably. The practicality of it made no sense. Electric garage motors and small overhead lights used minimal electricity compared to the rest of the neighborhood's consumption, like the clubhouse AC or the bright street lamps left on all night. Why single out the garages? Still, I wanted official confirmation. Over the next few days, I emailed the HOA board politely, asking them to clarify. Their short reply said, "Subject, garage power. Hello, resident. The HOA has decided to temporarily cut power to certain detached garages to control electricity expenses. We are exploring more cost-efficient ways to manage these circuits. Thank you for your patience. Sincerely, Barbara Karen Farnett, Treasurer, Parkwood Crest HOA." That was it. No mention of a timeline to restore power, no apology, no plan to offset the inconvenience. Just a terse explanation that it was temporary, with no date for a fix. This was beyond frustrating. We'd lost a crucial amenity that was part of our standard HOA fees. If they wanted to reorganize the budget, fine, but they should have consulted residents first or offered an alternative. My annoyance began to boil into anger. Meanwhile, I saw Karen in the distance, patrolling with a clipboard, completely uninterested in the chaos she'd caused. Parkwood Crest held monthly board meetings open to residents. Typically, only a handful showed up. This time, word spread that the garage power outage would be discussed, and more people attended. We squeezed into the small community center, forming a tense group of about 24. At the front sat the HOA board members, the president, a kindly older man named Stewart, a couple of other mild-mannered folks, and next to them, Karen, looking sharp in a pastel jacket, her expression smugly confident. The agenda touched on minor items first, landscaping schedules, upcoming holiday decorations, etc. Then, near the end, they addressed the garage power realignment, a fancy phrase for, "we cut your electricity." Stewart introduced the topic, carefully reading from notes. We recognize that some residents are concerned about the suspended power to the row of garages. We want to assure everyone that the HOA is seeking more cost-effective solutions. Treasurer Farnett will explain. Karen stood, her posture stiff. As treasurer, I oversee the association's finances. Our electricity bills have risen significantly over the past year. One area of unnecessary expense is the continuous power supply to rarely used garage spaces. Many residents seldom open or close those doors, yet we pay for their circuits around the clock. So we've temporarily shut off power in the row that showed the lowest usage. A hand shot up from the audience, my neighbor Sal. "Excuse me, lowest usage doesn't mean zero usage. I rely on my overhead light daily. I also keep a battery charger for small tools in there. Cutting us off is hardly fair." Karen shrugged with feigned sympathy. "I understand your inconvenience, but the cost savings are significant. The board is exploring alternatives, like installing motion sensor lighting or pay-per-usage door motors. But until we finalize a plan, the circuit will remain off." Another neighbor exclaimed, "But that's indefinite." Meanwhile, we're paying full HOA dues for partial services. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen pressed her lips. "We all share the burden of costs. If your row wants to pay an additional surcharge, we can consider flipping your circuit back on sooner." That drew gasps, residents outraged by the suggestion that we pay extra for something previously included. I raised my hand to speak. "Karen, with all due respect, the garages are an integral part of each property. Many of us store vehicles, bikes, tools. The overhead lights and automatic door motors are necessary. This wasn't an optional perk, it was part of the arrangement. Why not find other ways to cut back, or at least spread the cost across the entire HOA, rather than singling out one row of garages?" She pinned me with a stern look. "Because this row used an excessive portion of electricity for minimal usage. The data shows it's more cost-effective to keep it off until we find a better plan." She offered no data to back her claim. Of course. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but the board supports fiscal responsibility. We can't appease everyone's personal preferences." A few board members looked uneasy, but no one outright challenged Karen. She'd become the de facto voice on finances, and apparently, they trusted her judgments. Some residents argued passionately, but Karen's stony demeanor didn't waver. By the meeting's end, we had no resolution except the promise that plans were being explored. The circuit would stay off. We left, incensed at how easily Karen dismissed our concerns. In the aftermath, a group of us from the darkened garage row brainstormed possible solutions. Some suggested we collectively hire an electrician to rewire and bypass the shutoff, but that might be illegal or violate bylaws. Others thought about pressuring the board with a petition, but we doubted that alone would sway Karen. Meanwhile, more people around the neighborhood started complaining that if one row was vulnerable to budget cuts, maybe others would be next. A sense of wariness spread. For me, the biggest annoyance was losing my overhead light and door opener. Manually lifting the heavy garage door was a pain, especially in the morning rush. I also missed the convenience of my small workbench lamp. I tried running an extension cord from my house, which was about 40 feet away, but the layout of the alley made it awkward and potentially hazardous. The HOA also had a rule against long-term extension cords crossing common areas, so that wouldn't fly. Then, an idea sparked. I'd read about small-scale solar panel kits. Usually, people installed solar to offset home electricity, but it could theoretically power a small circuit in a detached structure. If I installed a few panels on the garage roof, along with a battery system, I might run the door opener, overhead light, and even a tool charger, completely bypassing the HOA circuit. I'd be independent of Karen's cost-cutting decisions. The thought thrilled me. Could I do it? Did the HOA rules even allow solar panels on a garage roof? I scoured the HOA guidelines. They mentioned exterior modifications, requiring approval for changes to a building's appearance. But there was no explicit rule banning solar. The main house roofs in Parkwood Crest were fairly uniform, so the HOA frowned on large panels visible from the street. But the detached garage roof was only visible from the alley side, not the front. Possibly I could get it approved if I made a decent case. The question was whether Karen would try to block me, but it was worth a shot. I began researching small off-grid solar solutions online. Many packages offered enough wattage to power lights and small motors, plus a battery for nighttime usage. The cost wasn't trivial, but if it meant freedom from the HOA's nonsense, I was willing to invest. Over the next week, I made notes of potential suppliers, estimated costs, and drafted a simple plan to present to the board. Armed with my research, I submitted an official request to the HOA for structural modification, as required. My application included a short summary. Project: installation of small-scale solar panels on the detached garage roof at my address. Purpose: provide independent power for garage door opener, overhead light, and minor tool usage. This system will not affect the HOA's electrical lines nor alter the main building. Details: 2 to 3 solar panels, approximate 200 W each, mounted flush to the roof, black frames to minimize visual impact. A small battery and inverter stored inside the garage. Wiring solely within the garage, not connected to HOA mains. Compliance: this meets local codes for private solar installations. I'll ensure no structural damage to the roof. Panels won't be visible from the street, only from the rear alley. Benefits: this arrangement alleviates any cost burden on the HOA and does not violate any known bylaw. I was cautious but hopeful. The plan was straightforward, and it might even benefit the HOA by proving we wouldn't use their electricity at all. However, I expected Karen to object, since it undermined her cost-cutting narrative. Why restore the circuit if we were going off-grid? During the next board meeting, my application was on the agenda. I arrived early, anxious. The board reviewed a packet of requests for garden fences, paint colors, etc. Then they reached mine. Stewart, the president, read my proposal aloud, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. This is interesting. We rarely get solar requests for detached garages. Karen pursed her lips. Solar panels? On that old garage? That might create an eyesore in the alley. Also, we can't guarantee the structural integrity for mounting them. It could cause roof leaks or extra weight. This is a risk. I responded calmly. I'm prepared to hire a licensed contractor who specializes in small solar installs. They'll ensure the roof can handle it. The panels are slim and weigh only about 3 to 4 pounds per square foot. Plus, they'll be angled low. You won't see them from the front. This is a personal system, so the HOA doesn't pay anything for it. Karen tried another angle. But do our bylaws allow major modifications to the garage exteriors? We typically require a uniform look. Solar might disrupt the aesthetic. I showed pictures of low-profile black panels, explaining they would blend with the dark roof. Another board member, Linda, chimed in. We did allow someone to install a small satellite dish on their garage roof last year. That's somewhat similar in principle. Why not solar? Karen's jaw tightened. She scanned the other board members. I just worry it sets a precedent. Next thing you know, everyone wants to slap solar on their garages, and we lose uniformity. Her frustration was clear. If I had solar, I'd no longer be under her cost-cutting thumb. To my relief, the board didn't seem swayed by her negativity. One member said it was a creative solution. Another pointed out it might help the environment. Stewart nodded. I don't see a direct violation, provided the panels are well-mounted and safe. Let's vote. They took a quick poll. Karen voted no, but the others voted yes, so my request was approved by a majority. Grateful, I thanked them. Karen glared at me, as if to say, we'll see what happens. But the official minutes recorded that my solar project was allowed to proceed. I left the meeting buzzing with excitement and a dash of apprehension. Karen was known to sabotage what she couldn't outright ban, so I'd have to be vigilant. Over the next couple of weeks, I finalized plans with a local solar installer, Suntech Solutions, who specialized in small off-grid systems. The cost was more than a simple fix, but I considered it an investment in independence. They assessed the garage roof, confirmed it could handle the panel load, and we scheduled an installation date. Meanwhile, I purchased a compact battery/inverter unit rated to run a half-horsepower garage door motor, overhead LED light, and some small tools. On the morning of installation, a Suntech truck parked in the alley behind my property. Two technicians climbed onto the garage roof, carefully drilling brackets and laying down three 200W panels. They also installed a weatherproof box for the wiring that would feed the battery bank inside. I hovered nearby, occasionally glancing around to see if Karen would appear, brandishing some new complaint. Indeed, about halfway through, I spotted her pastel figure down the alley, snapping photos with her smartphone. She didn't approach directly, just lurked from a distance. The crew eyed her warily, but continued their work. By early afternoon, the system was operational. The battery had begun charging under the bright sun, the inverter tested, and the garage door opener wired in. When we pressed the remote, the motor hummed to life, smoothly lifting the door. Overhead, the LED light flicked on, a small but triumphant sign that I was no longer at the mercy of the HOA's cost-cutting circuit. The sense of independence felt exhilarating. That evening, I posted a short message in our neighborhood forum, sharing that I'd successfully installed solar on my garage. I explained it was a personal choice to restore the functionality Karen had taken away. Some neighbors congratulated me. Others asked if I could help them do the same. A few joked that Karen must be fuming. I braced for her reaction. Sure enough, the next day, she fired off an email with the subject line, "Concerns regarding solar setup," addressed to me and CC'd the board. Karen's email read, Subject, "Concerns regarding solar setup. My name. I've observed your newly installed solar panels. While the board granted preliminary approval, I have concerns about potential glare to neighbors, roof load safety, and compliance with local building codes. We must ensure no nuisance or hazard is created. Please provide detailed engineering reports, warranty info, and a letter from the city inspector verifying code compliance. Failure to comply could result in a reevaluation of your approval. Sincerely, Barbara Karen Farnett, Treasurer and Finance Oversight, Parkwood Crest HOA. I groaned. It was typical Karen, seeking any procedural excuse to hamper me. The board's official approval should have been enough. She had no authority to unilaterally impose extra demands. But ignoring her might prompt more trouble. So I forwarded the email to the rest of the board and responded politely. Hi Karen. I already provided contractor documentation and standard permits to the board, which they deemed sufficient. The system meets local building codes per my licensed installer. If you need additional details, I can request them from Suntech Solutions. Best. My name. Linda, one of the board members, replied soon after, stating that the board had no additional requirements beyond the normal approval process. Karen's personal request for more docs is not an official board action, Linda clarified. If you have the standard permits, you're fine. That was reassuring. But Karen might still try to nitpick. Sure enough, The next weekend, I caught her in the alley, talking to a city code inspector. I overheard snippets about verifying structural integrity. The inspector was polite but somewhat confused, asking if there was an actual complaint. Karen gestured at my solar panels. The inspector nodded, scribbled notes, then walked over to me to ask if I had the city sign off. I produced the building permit Suntech had pulled. The inspector said everything looked in order. He left, apparently satisfied. Karen glared, thwarted again. In the weeks that followed, my garage solar setup became a point of curiosity for the entire block. People dropped by to see how it worked, impressed that I had power independent of the HOA lines. Some asked if it was expensive, how well it powered the door opener, etc. I happily gave informal tours. The battery capacity was enough to open and close the garage door multiple times daily, plus run the overhead LED for hours, with leftover juice to spare. Meanwhile, the rest of the garages in our row remained dark. The HOA still hadn't restored the circuit, citing ongoing analysis. This made Karen look increasingly foolish in the eyes of neighbors. While they fumbled with manual doors in the morning, I pressed my remote and watched my door glide open with a quiet hum. Sal half-jokingly threatened to install solar, too, though he wasn't sure if he could afford it. Karen's cost-cutting plan seemed to backfire. Instead of saving money or building goodwill, it fueled resentment. People questioned if our dues were mismanaged. The board's next meeting was filled with residents demanding a timeline for power restoration. Karen hemmed and hawed about waiting for a bulk discount from an electrical contractor. Stewart seemed uneasy, clearly feeling the heat. No official resolution arose, but the hostility toward Karen's approach was palpable. Amid this tension, I found small satisfaction in having outsmarted her. She'd expected to strong-arm us into paying surcharges or accepting indefinite darkness. Instead, I circumvented her entire game, thanks to sunlight. There was poetic irony in using renewable energy to break free from an overbearing official's petty tyranny. Yet I sensed we were building toward a final showdown. Karen wouldn't let me remain an example of successful defiance if she could help it. Rumors circulated that Karen was drafting a new bylaw restricting unauthorized power sources or exterior modifications. We had no official word, but neighbors claimed she was privately lobbying other board members, claiming that my solar array set a dangerous precedent. Some alleged she insisted the panels created liability issues. Others said she labeled them unsightly. Another rumor was that she wanted to pass a rule requiring the HOA to have the right to inspect and remove unapproved installations. I hoped these stories were exaggerated. However, given Karen's track record, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to push something like that. She despised losing control, and my solar system symbolized exactly that. To counter her potential moves, I attended more board meetings, staying informed. I also read the HOA's covenants thoroughly. They did have a process to amend bylaws, which required a majority board vote plus a certain percentage of homeowner approval. It wasn't easy, but Karen might attempt it. Meanwhile, my neighbors, especially those in the powerless row, were on my side. They saw me as standing up for their rights. I told them that if Karen tried to ban solar, we'd fight it. We had legal precedent in many states protecting homeowners' rights to install solar equipment. Indeed, so-called solar access laws existed in several jurisdictions. That didn't stop me from feeling anxious. I didn't want to wage a long legal battle just to keep my door running, but I was determined not to back down. The fact that I had jumped through the official hoops once gave me a strong case. If the board tried to retroactively ban it, they might face a PR nightmare among the residents who were already fed up. At last, the rumor materialized. One Wednesday morning, an email from Karen to the entire HOA membership arrived. Subject: Proposed Amendment, Restricting Unauthorized Installations. Dear neighbors, the board is reviewing an amendment to maintain consistent aesthetics and safe conditions. This amendment will require that any new or existing external installations, including solar panels, receive continuous board oversight and can be removed if deemed unsightly or non-compliant with safety standards. We invite residents to a special meeting to discuss this matter next Monday. The proposed rule ensures that modifications do not undermine property values or cause hazards. Sincerely, Karen Farnett, Treasurer, Parkwood Crest HOA. In layman's terms, Karen was threatening that even previously approved solar installations could be forcibly removed if the board decided so. My stomach knotted at the thought of them yanking my panels off the garage roof. I read the email over and over, steeling myself for the fight ahead. The notice also included mention that a 67% vote of homeowners was needed to adopt a bylaw amendment. That was no small hurdle, but Karen was nothing if not persistent. Within hours, the building's online forum exploded with commentary. Many saw it as a blatant attempt to target me. Some were outraged that the board was focusing on controlling one neighbor's solution instead of fixing the row's power. Others called Karen's claim of property values nonsense, pointing out that solar often increased home value. The stage was set for a showdown at the special meeting. I spent the following days rallying support among neighbors. People in my row especially promised to oppose any measure that restricted solar. Others recognized that if Karen could remove my panels, next she might come for their landscaping, shutters, or decorative choices. The notion that the board could seize installed property after the fact was chilling. Even board members not fully aligned with Karen seemed uneasy about giving that power to the HOA. By Monday, we had a large group ready to voice opposition. The special meeting took place in the community center, packed with possibly the largest crowd I'd ever seen at an HOA gathering. Karen sat behind a table with the other board members, wearing that pastel blazer and an expression of forced civility. The energy in the room was electric. Neighbors whispered among themselves, exchanging determined glances. Stewart, the HOA president, opened proceedings. Tonight, we discussed the proposed bylaw that would require additional oversight for any exterior modifications. This includes potential removal of existing items if the board deems them unsightly or unsafe. Treasurer Farnett, would you like to elaborate? Karen stood, clearing her throat. Thank you. Our community must preserve uniform aesthetics. While we appreciate certain innovations, like solar, we cannot let haphazard installations threaten curb appeal or safety. This amendment ensures the board can rectify any issues that arise post-approval, preventing eyesores or hazards from persisting. She paused, scanning the crowd. Solar panels on a garage roof, for instance, can degrade roofing materials, produce glare for neighbors, or pose a fire hazard if not maintained. We must have the authority to remove or demand changes if we see fit. This measure is purely for the collective good. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to interrupt. The crowd grew restless. Stewart invited open comments. Immediately, a line formed at the microphone. Person after person stood up to criticize the amendment, many referencing my case. Sal, Karen cut off our garage power to save a few bucks, leaving us in the dark. My name found a self-funded solution that doesn't cost the HOA a penny. Now you want to ban it? Ridiculous. Margaret, solar is the future. It can boost property values. Why hamper a resident's eco-friendly solution? Evelyn, if the board can remove anything they later deem unsightly, none of us has security. Today it's solar panels. Tomorrow it could be porch decorations or flower boxes. Even some folks who weren't personally impacted expressed fear about such sweeping power. I might consider small solar for my own roof, one said. Why should the board have the right to yank it off? The momentum was decidedly against Karen's proposal. Finally, I stood to speak. I want to remind everyone that the board voted to let me install these panels. They're safely mounted, up to code, and not visible from the street. I'd have had no reason for them if the HOA hadn't cut our garage power. Now that I'm independent, the treasurer wants to forcibly remove my solution. This sets a chilling precedent. The crowd clapped. Karen tried to retort, "We're not targeting you specifically," but a chorus of skeptical groans rose. She pressed on, "We just want to protect property values. Not everyone wants to see solar arrays or other odd contraptions in the neighborhood." Mark, another board member, weighed in. "I visited the garage. The panels are discreet. I saw no hazard or eyesore. Frankly, it's a clever workaround. I see no reason to pass an amendment that threatens to remove them." Murmurs of agreement spread. When the time came for a non-binding show of hands poll, an overwhelming majority opposed Karen's measure. According to the bylaws, to officially adopt an amendment, the HOA needed a 67% written approval from all homeowners, not just the meeting attendees. But the meeting's outcome signaled a severe lack of support. Even some older residents said they'd never sign away that kind of authority to the board. Karen's face was flushed with frustration, her posture rigid. She realized her cause was doomed. Stewart announced that, given the overwhelming resistance, the board would not pursue the amendment further. Applause erupted. Karen sat stiffly, absorbing her defeat. Then she abruptly gathered her papers and left before the meeting officially adjourned. The rest of us lingered, chatting, relieved that the threatened new rule had been quashed. After that meeting, Karen's influence in the HOA waned noticeably. The fiasco with the garages and her attempt to ban solar had damaged her standing. Residents demanded that power be restored to the row of garages. Stewart finally overruled Karen's excuses and hired an electrician. Within a month, the original circuit was back up. The monthly HOA fee increased slightly to cover infrastructure improvements, but most neighbors accepted that as a fair compromise. We'd rather pay a bit more than deal with arbitrary blackouts. Of course, I now had no need for their circuit in my garage. My solar system provided a sense of autonomy that I cherished. Even though the main power was reconnected, I left my door motor and lights on the solar line. I hardly ever used the HOA's electricity. On sunny days, I sometimes had surplus power left in the battery. I used it to charge small gadgets or occasionally vacuum my car in the garage. If I wanted to, I could probably feed a small extension to help Sal run a lamp or two. The experience made me appreciate the potential of micro off-grid solutions. Karen continued to send emails about keeping an eye on solar expansions, but nobody took her seriously anymore. The board recognized that if they tried to clamp down, they'd face another backlash. A few neighbors asked me to help them plan small solar additions, though the cost remained a barrier for some. Meanwhile, I enjoyed showing them how straightforward it was to break free from the petty constraints once forced upon us. With the row's power restored, Sal and others got their doors working again. Life returned to normal, except we now had a living example of how to outsmart the HOA's overreach. Some joked that next time Karen tried to impose silly restrictions, they'd look for creative hacks, too. The fiasco had taught us we could find solutions on our own terms, often turning the tables on meddling officials. A few weeks after the special meeting, I found myself in the alley behind my garage, rinsing off my car. Karen approached, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. I braced for a confrontation, but to my surprise, she said nothing about water usage or scolding me for some minor rule. Instead, she cleared her throat, gaze flicking to the solar panels on my garage roof. "I see you still have your setup," she remarked, arms folded. "Yep," I replied evenly. "Working great. Batteries fully charged most days." She pressed her lips. "I suppose you've proven your point. People keep praising your self-sufficiency. They say it saved them from higher dues." I shrugged, glad to help. It wouldn't have been necessary if the garage power hadn't been cut. But no hard feelings, just prefer to be prepared. Karen's expression softened slightly, as if she recognized how her own actions had backfired. "The board might look into solar for the clubhouse eventually," she murmured. "We've considered it, but never took it seriously. Now, seeing how you did it, maybe it's time." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I think that's a great idea. Solar could reduce the HOA's long-term electric bill, which you're so concerned about." She gave a curt nod, then turned to leave. Before walking away, she paused. "Well, I still believe we should watch our expenses carefully. But I suppose some innovations aren't so bad." That was as close to an olive branch as I'd ever expect from her. I simply nodded, letting her go without pressing further. Though we'd never be friends, it was a small moment of truce, acknowledgement that maybe she'd learned a lesson about dictating policy without considering practical alternatives. Meanwhile, I felt relief that the immediate threat to my solar system had passed. The rest of the neighborhood was calmer, free from the fear of abrupt garage blackouts or ill-conceived bylaw changes. As the months rolled on, Parkwood Crest settled into a new rhythm. The row of garages once left in darkness was fully lit again, and neighbors carried on their daily routines without fear of arbitrary power cuts. My solar panels remained in place, providing me the quiet satisfaction of flipping on my garage lights and door opener without a single watt from the HOA. Over time, the system paid dividends. My original investment meant I used minimal grid power for the garage, and I rarely faced any future meltdown from budget reasons. Karen, though still on the board, had lost the aura of unquestioned authority. The others now demanded transparency in financial decisions. When she floated a new cost-cutting measure, like limiting pool hours, board members pressed her for data or insisted on a resident vote. Freed from her iron grip, the community thrived with more open discussion, fewer draconian edicts. The fiasco with the garage had effectively rebalanced the board's power structure. I took a small bit of pride whenever passers-by asked about the solar panels or how I overcame the HOA nonsense. In a sense, the adversity had led me to a beneficial outcome I might never have pursued otherwise. My garage became a personal showcase of energy independence. That spark of rebellious creativity had shaped the entire community's view of what was possible and taught Karen that residents could and would fight back. With the passing seasons, the panels endured storms, snow, and the occasional curious bird, but they held strong. Each day, I watched the sun glint off their black surface, a silent reminder that the best way to deal with an overbearing HOA official might be to harness the power of nature itself. For me, that was the story's real moral. When someone cuts your power, create your own, literally, if you must. Freed from Karen's meddling, I found a path to stand on my own. The rest of Parkwood Crest, in turn, discovered a renewed sense of community, ensuring that no single official could reign unchecked again. And so it ended. The day Karen shut off my garage circuit to save money was the day I started building a solar solution that cost her the upper hand she prized. In the final balance, her petty attempt at control led to more autonomy for me, a more aware neighborhood, and a blow to her unilateral authority. A happy ending indeed, empowered by sunshine, unstoppable by any bureaucratic meddling. And that warm glow of victory felt every bit as bright as the rays fueling my garage door each day.